Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: FirstFT, Israel-Hamas truce and hostage deal to start Friday, says Qatar. Many in Middle East blame United States for devastation in Gaza. Nicaragua's Miss Universe title win exposes deep political divide in the Central American country. Inside the secret Israel-Hamas negotiations to release 50 hostages. Netanyahu vows war will continue after ceasefire as Israeli strikes on Gaza continue. FirstFT, Israel-Hamas truce and hostage deal to start Friday, says Qatar. Financial Times. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a temporary ceasefire and the release of hostages. The ceasefire will start on Friday at 7 a.m. local time, while the first hostages will be released at 4 p.m. local time. The deal was struck after Hamas agreed to free 50 hostages held in Gaza in exchange for a 4-day truce and the release of 150 Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. Many in Middle East blame United States for devastation in Gaza. Washington Post. The Middle East is becoming increasingly disillusioned with the United States as the conflict between Israel and Palestine continues. Many in the region view the conflict as an American war, arguing that without the diplomatic cover and high-tech munitions provided by the U.S., Israel would not be able to carry out its military operation in Gaza. The Israeli response to Hamas has led to growing criticism of the U.S., with international human rights groups accusing Israel of disproportionate violence and war crimes. Arab nations are calling on the U.S. to support a longer truce, but the U.S.-backed pause in fighting has been met with disappointment. The conflict has led to a boycott of U.S. brands in Egypt, some Persian Gulf states, and Lebanon. Starbucks and McDonald's outlets in these countries have been boycotted, with protesters marching on U.S. diplomatic missions and burning American flags. The boycott movement is growing, with videos on social media calling for a boycott of American brands. The boycotters argue that buying from these brands is complicity in the killing of Palestinians. The boycott movement is also a way for young Arabs to express their anger over the situation in Gaza without facing crackdowns on public demonstrations. The U.S. is losing support in the Middle East as a result of its backing of Israel. Political analysts argue that the U.S. is taking a reckless position that does not account for the long-term diplomatic, security, and economic consequences of alienating the region. The conflict has also toppled the U.S. from its moral high ground, with President Biden's statements about safeguarding civilian life in Ukraine juxtaposed with his more muted statements about Israel's actions in Gaza. The growing disillusionment with the U.S. is leading to concerns about the stability of U.S. allies in the region and risks the stability of the region as a whole. Nicaragua's Miss Universe title win exposes deep political divide in the Central American country. Associated Press. Nicaragua's government expressed joy and pride when Miss Nicaragua Shanice Palacios won the Miss Universe competition, but this quickly turned to condemnation when it was revealed that Palacios participated in protests against the regime in 2018. Ordinary Nicaraguans, who are largely forbidden from protesting or carrying the national flag, celebrated the win as a rare opportunity to take to the streets. Palacios' victory and her involvement in the protests were celebrated by the opposition, while the government denounced social media sites that celebrated the win as a victory for the opposition. Inside the secret Israel-Hamas negotiations to release 50 hostages. Wall Street Journal. After weeks of secret negotiations, the U.S. has helped broker a deal to free 50 Israeli hostages held by Palestinian militants in Gaza. The deal also includes the release of 150 Palestinian prisoners by Israel and daily pauses in Israel's drone surveillance of Gaza. The agreement, described as the first major diplomatic breakthrough in the 7-week-old war, raises hopes that further talks can secure the release of other hostages taken on October 7. However, U.S. officials have cautioned that the deal remains fragile as the agreement was negotiated between two enemy parties. Netanyahu vows war will continue after ceasefire as Israeli strikes on Gaza continue. ABC. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has informed U.S. President Joe Biden that Israel will continue its military operations against Hamas after the temporary ceasefire ends. Netanyahu made the announcement during a phone call with Biden on Wednesday. Friday briefing: Gaza ceasefire to begin today. New York Times. Negotiations between Israel and Hamas have resulted in an agreement to exchange 50 women and children held in Gaza for 150 Palestinian women and minors imprisoned in Israeli jails. The Qatari government, which brokered the talks, announced a 4-day pause in fighting in Gaza to allow for the hostage and prisoner releases. However, Israeli airstrikes and ground troops continue to attack northern Gaza. The ceasefire is said to begin at 7 a.m. Gaza time, with the release of the hostages starting at 4 p.m. It is hoped that this agreement could lead to a significant diplomatic breakthrough in the 7-week-long war. New York court gives blessing on Venezuela bond standstill. Bloomberg. A New York court has supported a move by holders of Venezuela's defaulted bonds to protect a debt standstill agreement. The decision by the New York Supreme Court backs a deal reached between Venezuela's opposition-controlled National Assembly and holders of the country's defaulted bonds. The deal suspends the statute of limitations on the debt until 2028 in order to avoid a wave of litigation. The move was made by a group of investors with more than $10 billion of sovereign and state oil company bonds to ensure that the extension of the debt deadlines cannot be challenged by a potential new Venezuelan government. DeSantis mocked for boasting about measures from Biden's CHIPS Act. The Independent. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced on Twitter that he was awarding over $28 million in funding to expand Florida's semiconductor and chip manufacturing industry, which was made possible by the Bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act signed by President Joe Biden. However, liberals on social media mocked DeSantis for touting the investment, with some pointing out that it was a result of legislation passed by Biden. DeSantis did not speak out against the CHIPS and Science Act, and had previously made announcements for chip manufacturing in his state. Despite announcing his campaign for president in May, DeSantis has failed to gain traction against former President Donald Trump, and has fallen behind former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. Daniel Noboa is sworn in as Ecuador's president, inheriting the leadership of a country on edge. Associated Press. Daniel Noboa, an inexperienced politician and heir to a fortune built on the banana trade, has been sworn in as Ecuador's president. Noboa's main objective is to reduce violence and make progress a habit, and restore public safety that drug cartels and other criminal organizations robbed the country of at the start of the decade. During Guillermo Lasso's tenure, violent deaths soared, reaching a record 4,600 in 2022. Noboa's government will have to undertake tax reforms to encourage growth and the revitalization of the economy. China tried using economic ties to bring Taiwan closer. It isn't working. Wall Street Journal. Taiwanese businesses are reducing their reliance on China and are increasingly pivoting towards the US and other markets. China had hoped to win control of Taiwan by convincing its people their economic futures were inextricably tied to China. However, the US replaced mainland China as the top buyer of Taiwanese agricultural products for the first time last year, a sign of the shift. Taiwanese exports to the US in the first 10 months of 2023 were more than 80% higher than in the same period of 2018, Taiwanese government data shows. Taiwanese exports to the mainland were 1% lower. Taiwan's outbound investment has also shifted, moving to Southeast Asia, India, and the US. Trump-era tariffs and Biden administration export controls have raised the cost of sourcing from China, and in some cases prohibited it. China has also banned Taiwanese agricultural products and restricted outbound tourism to Taiwan, pushing Taiwanese businesses to look elsewhere. The US and Taiwan reached an agreement in May on a number of trade and investment measures to deepen ties. A new Cold War between China and the US is not inevitable. Telegraph. The recent summit between the US and China has echoes of the 1959 meeting between the US and the Soviet Union, which was followed by a series of tense events. The relationship between the US and China is similarly fragile, with recent incidents causing strain. It is important for both countries to maintain channels of communication to prevent further escalation. The potential flashpoint is Taiwan, where China has long sought reunification. A confrontation between the US and Chinese navies in the region could lead to a dangerous military standoff. The resumption of military communications agreed upon in the recent summit is a positive step in preventing such a scenario. The geoeconomic picture is also complex, with China remaining a massive market and vital source of supply. However, business operations in China have become more difficult due to regulatory uncertainty and market access barriers. The US-China relationship is likely to continue with fractious strategic competition, punctuated by periodic crises. Businesses must be prepared to respond to this volatility and build resilience into their operations and supply chains. Countries and businesses that can navigate this complexity will prosper, while those that cannot will fall behind. Trump tells Argentina's President-elect Javier Milei he plans to visit Buenos Aires. Associated Press. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has called Argentina's President-elect Javier Milei, expressing his desire to meet with him. The right-wing populist Milei has previously expressed his admiration for Trump. The date of Trump's visit has not yet been confirmed, but Milei's inauguration is scheduled for December 10. UAE tightens scrutiny on Russian firms amid pressure from U.S. Bloomberg. Russian firms based in the United Arab Emirates, UAE, are facing greater scrutiny from local banks as the UAE seeks to tackle sanctions evasion and be removed from the Global Financial Action Task Force's watch list. The influx of Russian money into the UAE following the 2014 invasion of Ukraine has slowed as banks increasingly reject transactions, demand more documentation, and block funds. UAE officials have sought to tighten sanctions compliance as the US, UK, and EU put pressure on the Gulf state to tackle illicit flows and close channels used to bypass trade sanctions. The US hostages that won't be released in Hamas prisoner swap. The Independent. A prisoner swap deal between Israel and Hamas is set to begin on Friday, with as many as 50 hostages being released. However, Jonathan Deckelchan's son, Sagui, who was kidnapped during attacks by Hamas on the Niruz kibbutz on October 7, will not be among those released. The swap is expected to begin with the release of women and children from Gaza, followed by the release of women and children from Israeli jails. Negotiations are continuing over the final details of the exchange. Who is Gurpatwant Pannan, target of foiled murder plot in U.S.? Reuters. Gurpatwant Singh Pannan, an immigration attorney charged with terrorism in India for advocating separatism and holding referendums overseas to carve out an independent Sikh state, was the target of a foiled murder plot in the U.S. U.S. authorities have issued a warning to India over concerns that New Delhi was involved, prompting Indian officials to express surprise and concern. This is the second diplomatic incident that has thrust New Delhi into the global spotlight after Canada accused it of being linked to the killing of a Sikh separatist in Vancouver in June. India faces questions about another reported foreign assassination plot. New York Times. The Indian government is facing questions over whether it was involved in an assassination plot on Western soil, as American officials said they had expressed concerns to New Delhi about a thwarted plan to kill a dual U.S.-Canadian citizen. U.S. officials did not publicly accuse India of orchestrating the killing of the dual citizen, reported to be Gurpatwant Singh Pannan, a vocal advocate of the cause of Sikh separatism. The revelation comes months after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused the Indian government of involvement in the killing of another Sikh separatist, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Balloons, bands and Santa. Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade ushers in holiday season in New York. The Toronto Star. The annual Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade took place yesterday in New York City, marking the start of the holiday season. Celebrities including Cher and Jon Batiste performed while balloons of characters such as Snoopy and SpongeBob SquarePants floated above the streets. The parade also included marching bands and floats. OxyContin makers' settlement plan divides victims of opioid crisis. Now it's up to the Supreme Court. Associated Press. The Supreme Court is set to hear arguments December 4 over whether the agreement, part of the resolution of Purdue Pharma's bankruptcy, violates federal law. The issue for the justices is whether the legal shield that bankruptcy provides can be extended to people such as the Sacklers, who have not declared bankruptcy themselves. The legal question has resulted in conflicting lower court decisions. It also has implications for other major product liability lawsuits settled through the bankruptcy system. In Biden's climate law, a boon for green energy and Wall Street. New York Times. The 2022 climate law has accelerated investments in clean energy projects across the United States. It has also delivered financial windfalls for big banks, lawyers, insurance companies, and startup financial firms by creating an expansive new market in green tax credits. The law created a wide range of tax incentives to encourage companies to produce and install solar, wind, and other low-emission energy technologies. But the Democrats who drafted it knew those incentives, including tax credits, wouldn't help companies that were too small, or not profitable enough, to owe enough in taxes to benefit. So lawmakers have invented a workaround that has rarely been employed in federal tax policy. They have allowed the companies making clean energy investments to sell their tax credits to companies that do have a big tax liability. That market is already supporting large and small transactions. Clean energy companies are receiving cash to invest in their projects, but they're getting less than the value of the tax credits for which they qualify, after various financial partners take a slice of the deal. Ladies and gentlemen, it's me, Dr. Six, your favorite observer from the 6-degree world. I hope you're all doing well and ready for some news roundup. Let's dive right in. In the Middle East, tension between Israel and Palestine continues to escalate, with the blame shifting towards the United States. Many in the region view the conflict as an American war, arguing that without the U.S. support, Israel would not be able to carry out its military operations in Gaza. This growing disillusionment with the U.S. has led to a boycott of American brands in some countries, as young Arabs express their anger over the situation in Gaza. The U.S. is losing support and risking the stability of its allies in the region. In Nicaragua, the Miss Universe win by Shanice Palacios has exposed the deep political divide in the country. The government initially celebrated the victory but quickly condemned it when it was revealed that Palacios had participated in protests against the regime in 2018. Ordinary Nicaraguans saw the win as a rare opportunity to take to the streets and express their opposition to the government. Secret negotiations between Israel and Hamas have resulted in a deal to release 50 hostages held by Palestinian militants in Gaza. The agreement also includes the release of 150 Palestinian prisoners by Israel. This is seen as a major diplomatic breakthrough in the ongoing conflict, but the deal remains fragile as it was negotiated between two enemy parties. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has informed U.S. President Joe Biden that Israel will continue its military operations against Hamas after the temporary ceasefire ends. This announcement comes as airstrikes and ground troops continue to attack northern Gaza. In other news, a New York court has supported a move by holders of Venezuela's defaulted bonds to protect a debt standstill agreement. The court decision backs a deal reached between Venezuela's opposition-controlled National Assembly and bondholders to avoid litigation and suspend the statute of limitations on the debt until 2028. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been mocked on social media for boasting about measures from President Biden's CHIPS and Science Act. DeSantis announced funding to expand Florida's semiconductor industry, which was made possible by the bipartisan legislation. However, critics pointed out that it was a result of Biden's legislation, not DeSantis' own efforts. Daniel Noboa, an inexperienced politician and heir to a fortune built on the banana trade, has been sworn in as Ecuador's president. His main objective is to reduce violence and restore public safety that drug cartels and criminal organizations have robbed the country of. In international relations, Taiwan is reducing its reliance on China and focusing more on the U.S. and other markets. Taiwanese businesses are shifting their exports and investments away from China due to increased costs and regulatory uncertainties. The U.S. and Taiwan have also reached an agreement to deepen their trade and investment ties. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has expressed his desire to visit Argentina's President-elect Javier Milei, who is known for his right-wing populist views. The date of Trump's visit has not been confirmed yet. Russian firms in the UAE are facing greater scrutiny from local banks, as the UAE seeks to tackle sanctions evasion and be removed from the Global Financial Action Task Force's watch list. The influx of Russian money into the UAE has slowed as banks reject transactions and demand more documentation. On the entertainment front, the annual Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade took place in New York City, marking the start of the holiday season. The parade featured balloons, bands, and floats, bringing joy to the streets of New York. And finally, in some legal news, the Supreme Court is set to hear arguments over whether a settlement plan in Purdue Pharma's bankruptcy violates federal law. The issue at hand is whether the legal shield provided by bankruptcy can be extended to individuals such as the Sackler family, who have not declared bankruptcy themselves. That's all for today, folks. Remember, I'm always here to bring you the latest news and share my thoughts on the world around us. Now it's your turn. What are your thoughts on these news stories? Let's discuss. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.